You also campaigned on reducing legal immigration, and I'm wondering if some critics are saying that you are using the virus now in this crisis to follow through on that promise to reduce legal immigration.
No. Well, I want people that are in this country, I want our citizens to get jobs. I don't want them to have competition. We have a very unusual situation where something came in that nobody has seen for many, many decades. Probably 1917 would be the closest analogy if you look at it, when you look at the contagion, the kind of contagion we're talking about. So no, I'm not doing that at all. I want the American worker and our American citizens to be able to get jobs. I don't want them to compete right now.
President saying he's suspending immigration because national security reasons, of course. We don't want additional virus cases brought into the country. And also, he doesn't want Americans at a time when we're losing tens of millions of jobs, unprecedented job losses, competing with non-Americans for those jobs. Sara Carter is an investigative reporter. She also is a dear friend of mine and a Fox News contributor. I like to think that being my dear friend is more important than being a contributor, but, who knows? But anyway, Sara Carter, I just realized I threw that in the middle. I'm like, well, I should probably give her resume first. But anyway, Sara Carter, thank you so much for joining us.
Dear friend is definitely at the top of the list.
Thank you. I'll take it. You don't have to put that on your official resume, but I'll take it.
No, it is on my official resume. Buck Sexton is my dear friend.
There we go. So Sara, I know we want to talk about the Crossfire Hurricane stuff because you've been all over that story for years now and have been breaking lots of news on it. And I think people think of your investigative journalism work on that as much as anybody in the field, if not the premier person in that field. But I know you also do a lot on the border. And when the border was a really hot topic, I used to come to you to get insights about your travels in Central America and what you're hearing from Border Patrol. Given the crisis right now, the president's decision to try and suspend immigration, what are you hearing from CBP, the challenges that they face, and just what's going on at our southern border right now?
Well, I got to tell you, from the very beginning, CBP, our U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers that are out there on the border on the front lines every day, were very concerned. There are a number of Custom and Border Protection officers who have been exposed to the coronavirus. There, of course, those that do have it have been pulled off the front line until they can get better and recover. That's a big issue. I did speak with Patricia Kramer. She is a union rep for the very front line officers at the ports of entry. There was a lot of concern, and there still is a growing concern. It's a story I'm actually working on right now, that even though people aren't allowed into the country, there's quite a bit of traffic going into Mexico and then coming back in. So they've been fighting that, saying that their officers are being exposed. And as far as this suspension, the 60-day suspension of immigration across the board, I think it's vitally important, Buck, because you're looking at a number of issues here: economics, exposure of our officers, the disease, which is still rampant and spreading in other parts of the world as well as here in the United States. And people got to get a grasp on this, and especially on the economic side. One of the biggest problems we have right now is how are we going to get Americans back into the workforce? Some of these businesses, especially small businesses, have been lost now completely. We know that some of these businesses are not coming back. And Americans need to be the first in line to get the jobs once the economy, which it will come back, gets going. We have to be able to get Americans back into the workforce, get our economy pumping again like it was before. The president's doing the right thing. And anyways, this moratorium right now is happening at a time when we already have a moratorium on this. This just buys more time for the administration and for the government to figure out who and what needs to take priority. And that, of course, is the American people and our law enforcement officials on the front line.
Did you see the Madeleine Albright quote? She's been somebody who's very, very friendly to, free trade with China. That's actually not free trade, as we know. She's been enriching herself for a long time on that one. That people have been talking about that for the last few days. But she said that it's almost like the president wants to shut down the country. And it's un-American about the border. And everyone's sitting around like, I can't even leave my house, lady. What do you mean? The country is shut down.
The country is shut down, and this is the issue. When people were still coming back and forth across the border, and a lot of and believe me, this was happening even under the president's directive. There were quite a few supervisors on the front line, and people were saying, well, we're going to still let the traffic flow back and forth. I did write a story on that, where they were coming back and forth, and then you have other officers that are right there working the front line saying, whoa, wait a minute. Why are we being exposed if our families are forced on lockdown? How can people come across the border here to the United States to buy milk or to visit family, or vice versa? People leaving the United States who have family in Mexico or who are shopping in Mexico. You just can't do that when you're trying to stem an outbreak of this magnitude, especially whether or not the statistics are all right. And you and I have both pointed this out, on these random stats. Whether or not that's happening, the American people are on lockdown. I mean, I'm lucky if I get to Safeway every day, to go pick up groceries. That's my trip out of the house, right? And sometimes walking with my daughter around our neighborhood just to get exercise. So if we're on lockdown, well, then why should we have our border wide open for people to travel in and out? There is a reason why this administration is doing that. It's smart, and it's actually beyond just the mitigation of the spread of this disease. It's bringing us back to what we need to do, and that is put Americans first economically. We can move ahead, and if there is a place and a time where we will be reopening the border, there has to be priorities in place. And, Madeleine Albright has always been a globalist apologist, along with quite a few other people. They definitely are the antithesis to President Trump, directly opposite in his thinking of putting America first. This is about globalism, and we have to be very careful about, people that really want to push this global idea of, opening our borders, past NAFTA deals, all of these Iran deals that were so bad that President Trump basically just eliminated and renegotiated. And he did that for a reason. He did that to put the American worker first.
We're speaking to Sara Carter. If you have not already, you should go to saracarter.com. That's her site where she's posting stories, and including the investigative pieces that often blow a huge hole in the deep state narrative, especially around issues of Russia collusion and, well, the absence of Russia collusion. But Sara, before we move to that topic and your latest work on that, because I know we have these footnotes declassified now that we can see from the Inspector General report that are some, in a normal circumstance, if we didn't have a global pandemic, everybody would be saying, wow, that's a big story. But right now it's getting overshadowed, as everything is. One more on the coronavirus situation. Mexico, you were talking about the border and our border security. Mexico has not yet been hit that badly by COVID-19. But as of today, there's all these reports that they've had Mexico City, for example, has had half of Mexico's 8,772 cases, 35% of the 712 deaths. Now, Mexico's over 100 million people. It's a large country. They've had very few of these cases. Are they expecting there to be a major spike? And if that happens, what does Border Patrol think is going to happen on our end?
That's right. It's a great question. And it is something that not only the medical community is looking at, but I can tell you the intelligence community is looking at, and our law enforcement officials. It would stand to reason, according to sources that I've spoken to, that Mexico and Central America will see spikes in the spread of COVID. Now, every nation is different, and how they classify and can, get their statistics is different, and also environments are different. So that is something that they're going to be looking at, whether or not the warmer weather as summer comes around, will that mitigate the spread of this virus? But remember, Buck, there will be, according to medical officials, a concern that there will be a second wave. And a lot of people have been talking about, coming up with a vaccine. Will we have a vaccine in the future? Well, that could be years from now. That could be 2 to 4 years from now, if they ever find a vaccine that actually is really going to work against this. Because remember, viruses and pathogens, they mutate, they change. And that's always been the problem when we try to stay one step ahead of the flu every year. Sometimes the flu vaccines are effective. Other times they're not effective, because that means there's a different strain of it coming around. But I can tell you this, talking to people in Central America, this is a big, big concern for them. I spent a lot of time in Guatemala, I know a lot of the senior Guatemalan officials in the government from the previous government of President Morales, and some who are currently in this new administration. They are watching it very carefully. They're working very closely with U.S. officials on this and trying to monitor. But gosh, Buck, you've traveled to a lot of the similar places that I've traveled to around the globe. And, there's a lot of areas of poverty in Central America as well. And it's very, very difficult to get the right medical officials in those areas. It's very, very difficult.
And also, I would have concerns that if you're going to have, COVID-19 and you have some of the economic devastation that we've had in this country, if that starts to filter, south of us, we can handle it better certainly than those economies can. And the possible influx of the left will refer to them as COVID refugees, even though we have COVID here, that could very well be coming. And I think that's a concern that we all have to keep an eye on. That's why the president shutting the borders might be a prescient decision at this point, shutting down immigration, I should say. But Sarah, also just because we got a few minutes for this one, you've been following Crossfire Hurricane, the FBI's bogus investigation into President Trump for Russia collusion in the 2016 election. And there was some big stuff that came out in the Inspector General Horowitz report, new stuff from the footnotes that are now declassified. What can you tell us about it?
I think this is probably some of the biggest news. And unfortunately, we're not seeing a lot of the major news outlets report on this. The American people must be informed about what happened here. And these footnotes that were declassified by Chuck Grassley and Ron Johnson, the senators that have been investigating and really pushing for the DNI, that's the acting director of national intelligence, Rick Grinnell, as well as the attorney general, to declassify these footnotes, basically exposed in a nutshell that the FBI, senior members of the FBI and the Crossfire Hurricane team, as well as, I believe from what I'm hearing from my sources, other members like John Brennan, James Clapper, former Obama officials, knew all along, Buck, that this information was Russian disinformation. Basically, what Christopher Steele put in his dodgy dossier, the debunked dossier, was actually information supplied to him by some Russian-connected Kremlin sources that were putting disinformation into the dossier to harm President Trump and to harm our elections, to harm our nation, and to divide and seed chaos. The question is, knowing that they knew this, why did they continue to do it? And what is their culpability in this? From the beginning, I've always said this appeared to be a soft coup from senior Obama administration officials that did not want candidate Trump to become president. And if he did, they wanted to take him down. And more what we're seeing is that they were very aware that they were the ones actually colluding with Russia, that they were actually spreading Russian disinformation. And just as a footnote to all of that, before you let me go, I spoke yesterday to Nigel West, a former parliamentarian from Great Britain, as well as an expert on intelligence, written a number of books, and did an investigation into Christopher Steele back in 2017. And what he discovered from Christopher Steele's report, and by the way, this was somebody who was friends with Christopher Steele, so this isn't somebody who hated him by any means. This is somebody who was asked to conduct an investigation. After looking at Christopher Steele's numerous reports, because there were actually 17 reports that he actually did on the Trump administration, he concluded that Christopher Steele made up the report, that he was basically none of the report was actually true.
So he's in the intel business, we'd call him a fabricator. He's a fabricator.
A fabricator, exactly. That he fabricated this report, which is really stunning. Now, he may have had, and according to others, he did have some connections to Russian sources. And he did. But the thing is the way he described his sources, the way he described his sourcing, there was just no way he could have had this information from any legitimate sources. So what we see now is that Christopher Steele basically was a fabricator, and the information that he did put in there that seemed the most salacious was just actually Russian disinformation from Russian intelligence, from their GRU and FSB. And so it looks like the Democrats themselves were the ones that were duped by the Russians. And for those that weren't duped, they should answer the question to the Attorney General and to Prosecutor John Durham. If you knew this was Russian disinformation, why did you assist in spreading it?
Sara Carter, everybody. Sara, please stay on this story because we're gonna need to find out what the resolution is here, and if we don't keep the pressure on, we know they're gonna. You and I both know the old Potomac two-step. They'll sweep it under the rug unless folks like you stay on it. So thank you for all your work on that. Everyone should be following Sara on social media. SaraACarter.com is her website. Sara, thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Buck. Great to be on.
It is happening in the context of Congress having gone on recess for a month. We are going to pass a small potatoes bill, and then we are talking about recessing again until May 4th. And if we are going to bring every member or call back almost every member who can back to DC to pass a small incremental bill, and with the knowledge that we are not coming back until next month again, that's 2 rent checks. And the last time we left, again, we lost over 9/11's worth of people due to this lack of action.
We lost a 9/11's worth of people due to lack of action. How? That's quite a thing to say, and that's AOC, as you know, the favorite young member of Congress for the left. And they've realized, Bernie Sanders, folks, you're not going to be hearing much more about that guy much longer. Bernie Sanders, he had his several runs at the office of the presidency, and it's not going to happen. They're going to have to start looking to build the next generation of left-wing statists and build them up. And AOC is certainly at very close to the top of that list, if not already at the top of that list. But notice the language being used here. I think it's important to drop in on the progressives in Congress to understand what the longer-term game is. A small potatoes bill? Now, I'm willing to say that clearly they didn't lay out enough money. Everyone knows this. That's why they had to then. But when we're going to start referring to 500 or so, I think it's 480 something was the actual number, but close to $500 billion of short-term spending as a small potatoes bill, it's clear that we have lost all sense of proportion and also are kind of blithely gliding toward real economic catastrophe. If $500 billion of spending could be described by anybody as small potatoes, we got big problems. And the Democrats all along are seeing this as no matter what happens with the spending, this is an opportunity. This is setting the stage going forward for a whole lot more spending. The ramifications of this, my friends, on a policy level will last well beyond this virus. And that's even if the virus stretches to be a menace for a couple of years.
No amount of money, not all the money in China, will save us from ourselves. Our only hope of rescuing this great country is to reopen the economy. If you print up billions of dollars and give it to people, they are unlikely to spend it until you end the quarantine. The good news, though, is that the scientific community finally has facts instead of conjecture. The question before us isn't do nothing or print endless amounts of bailout cash. The debate should now include the one choice that will get our economy growing again: reopening American commerce.
We need to heed the senator's words here. Rand Paul is one of these guys who, when you need him, you really need him. I think that Rand Paul, and I've always thought that his political skills weren't as far along as his knowledge of political theory, and I do believe he's a principled guy in his approach to politics too. That he does, his beliefs matter in the exercise of his job as a senator, which makes me also think that I think he'd be a pretty good president. I know people don't think so. I think he wouldn't bother you. You wouldn't have people getting, pulled off of subway cars because they don't have a face mask on. Although that's a state issue. I'm not trying to take a cheap shot at our current president, but I'm just saying, he's a guy who does believe in liberty and freedom, and he also understands, because of what he knows, but also the legacy of his father, Dr. Ron Paul. he understands that this amount of. By the way, it's Dr. Ron Paul. I know Rand's an ophthalmologist. Producer Mark, is Ron Paul a doctor too, or am I imagining that? Sometimes so much information.
Yeah, he was
crammed
a
into.
physician.
Thank you. He was a physician. I thought so. So he's Dr. Ron. He's a real doctor, not a Dr. Jill Biden doctor, a PhD in education. No. We are not going to call you Dr. Jill Biden because of your PhD in education. Where were we on this? Yes, Rand Paul saying we have to reopen the economy. The projections of what starts to happen if we continue to spend money at this rate, and really, I shouldn't say spend money, print money. That's the issue. I think a lot of people, and I've seen some analysis from Wall Street on this. A lot of people recognize that that those who can are sitting on the sidelines, not spending money and not investing because of the great degree of uncertainty right now. And those who are in a tough position, they're spending the money very quickly that the government's giving them because they have no choice, and it's coming up short. They don't have enough cash. That's $1,200 is not going to last people. Reopening the economy is going to be a very complicated, very challenging process. And that's assuming that we're all operating from the good faith position of what's best for the United States, what's best for the country as a whole. We have to reckon with the truth that there are people right now who I think in their mind they separate out. They'd say, "Oh, I want all life to be protected from COVID-19." But if the economy needs to be, a little bit beat up, a little bit longer, so that Donald Trump loses the election, they're okay with that. So this is where you're going to see this fight, because that desire to do everything possible, as they say, if it saves one life, that theory, if it saves one life, it should be done. That will be used to shout down anyone who's pushing for reopening. And there's another concern here, another problem that a lot of the political debate obscures right now, and that is if some states do open with the more limited mitigation measures. Remember, no state is going back to totally normal, but if some states open with these mitigation measures in place and they don't have a spike, what then? Why did we need all 50 states, effectively all 50? I think it's maybe 47 or 48 technically, but why do we need all these states to have the shutdown orders? Why is over 90% of America told stay home, you can't go outside? Does anyone find an easy justification for that if, in fact, it seems that states are able to control this on their own with much less severe mitigation measures? That's going to be a whole debate. It will also then indicate that the blame Trump campaign, because he did not order the federal shutdown fast enough, may not have any data, any merit behind it. Put aside that everybody got this thing wrong and nobody really knew. But if states were able to, on their own, engage in mitigation measures that would control the virus as it continues to be a threat and continues to spread, which it will. I mean, Dr. Burke said it at the top of the show. We all know there are going to be more COVID cases. There's no way around it. But if it's not an overwhelming problem, and if the loss of life is not something that society cannot sustain, right, then everyone's going to turn around and say, well, hold on a second. What was going on here with these? What was going on with this declaration from on high that we have to have the shutdown? And then everyone's going to look at the pain, the alcoholism, the child abuse, the loss of jobs, the loss of livelihoods, the destruction of businesses, the anxiety, the psychological pain, the depression, the duress that we're all under. And we were told it was for our own good. Remember, we're told it was for our own good. There's going to be a moment of reckoning for all of that. They keep trying to tell you that the Swedish model is a disaster. It's not. It's just not true. They keep trying to tell you that we shouldn't look to other countries that did not shut down. Did Japan shut down its whole economy? No, it did not. Why? The only answer, we were led to believe, the only answer, unless you wanted just bodies in the streets, millions of people dead, the only answer was to shut down the entire economy. The first time in history that the United States has voluntarily decided to shut down its economy. We do not do this during wars. We do not do this during previous pandemics. And this is what our policy community settled on as the answer here. And it wasn't just they got us going with a 2-week shutdown, then they extended another month. 6 weeks of shutdown, huh? And then we get to what do we do with the second wave that may come. Everyone right now is trying to see the future about how bad this will be coming back in the fall. And we don't know certain things, and no one's going to know them right now. Like, will we have better therapeutics? Will we be in a stronger position to fight the virus then than we are now based on the tools that we have? There's so much focus on testing. Where will our testing be at that point? Now, remember, as I've said to you, by the time that, no matter how good we think the testing gets, test and trace is going to be imperfect, which means there will be spread of this disease. It'll hopefully be a containable situation, but let's understand that even the people that are yelling testing, 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 they accept implicitly that there will be some trade-offs here, which means there will be people who die from this virus because of the reopening, even if we get to the testing levels that they declare are completely necessary. And, Nancy Pelosi, never helpful in any of these discussions, keeps repeating this mantra about science as if that's an answer to what the science says. What exactly right now? Shut down forever? This is not a scientific only question. This is also a deeply political question that goes to individual rights and freedoms and the Constitution. Here's what Pelosi says, though, nonetheless. Play 6.
There's a Boy Scout saying, proper preparation prevents poor performance. Well, that was exactly where the president gets an F. He was not properly prepared, not with the truth, with the facts, or the admission of what was happening in our country. Delay, whatever, delay, denial, death. Instead, we'd like to see him insist on the truth, and we must insist on the truth with him. And that is really what should give us hope. If he finally, it's never too late. It's never too late, as I keep saying, to tell the truth, Mr. President, and it's never too late to do the right thing and to pay attention to science, 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 and science.
This is really what liberals have been reduced to. Testing, testing, testing. Science, science, science. Just repeating words that they think make them sound smart. This is a little bit like the reduction they do about much more complicated issues like climate change, for example. Do you believe in climate change? It's a stupid question, but people ask it all the time. What does it even mean? Do I believe in climate change that is real but not particularly important? Do I believe in climate change that would justify the shutdown of the global economy in order to save the planet? Think of the span there. This is like some of the modeling, and oh my gosh, I'm going to have to dig more into the models of the past. It's not just that we've gotten the wrong models for disease right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. The models for Ebola were terribly wrong. The models for SARS were terribly wrong. Just go back. The models for initial HIV infections were very wrong. I mean, the models for in the early stages of a disease are almost useless. It's like someone who gives you a range, a range of, the stock market. I'm predicting confidently, and I'm going to look you in the eyes right now, America, and I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to predict the stock market that the Dow will be somewhere between 5,000 and 35,000 over the next 6 months. That's right. You can take that to the bank. Is that a helpful prediction? Does that tell you how you could manage your money and what sort of risks you'd be willing to take? Dow at 5,000, things are very bad. Dow at 35,000, things are fantastic. We must have found a cure to this. Miraculous, right? But that's what you see with these disease spread models that the pandemic preparedness community relies on. And it does very much affect the decision making that we've had about how quickly we're willing to start to reopen businesses. And that then brings me to some of the impediments that we see to the reopening of businesses that we've known they're real, we've known they're going to happen, but now it is becoming apparent from what's actually happening on the ground in states across the country. What happens to a restaurant now, even if they want to bring people back? I'll walk you through that.
Mitch McConnell likes to say we delayed the bill. No, he delayed the bill. 2 weeks ago, he came to the floor and said, this is all we're doing, just the 250. And the Democrats were united, House and Senate. The Senate Democrats went to the floor and said no to that. We have a better idea about hospitals and testing and more funds for all of the businesses, the lower, shall we say, the unbankable small businesses. So we were very pleased that he finally came around to the fact that we had to go forward with this. So he was the one wasting time. I say that because I keep hearing him say, we delayed. No, he delayed.
Total rewriting of history from, wine cooler Pelosi over here. I mean, just total crap from her. We all know. And the media lets her get away with it. They pretend, they speak truth to power, the guardians of our democracy, the journos, the Fourth Estate. Please. They're the worst. The worst. We all know that Pelosi was playing games. Everybody knew Pelosi was playing games. No one says that they're not going to have there's not a willingness to try to help out hospitals. Look, part of the shutdown problem here, part of the issue is that hospitals are going bankrupt now, folks. People can't get normal care, and hospitals are going bankrupt all across the country. With each passing day, they're going under because of the cessation of elective procedures, which when you look at the full scope of elective procedures, some of them are not really that elective. They're pretty important, pretty urgent. But also a lot of preventative medicine has not been occurring. I mean, I don't even want to think about this, but I do think we have to keep it somewhere in the back of our minds. Think of all the cancer screenings, all the mammograms, all the analysis for early stage prostate cancer, all these things. I mean, here's a perfect example. I haven't gone to the doctor. I mean, I haven't gone to the barber, but I haven't gone to the doctor this year to get checked out and have my physical. And I don't know when that's going to happen. And now you might say, well, I'm a relatively young, healthy guy, and so it shouldn't be a big deal. Well, what if I don't get to go for 6 months and I do find out that I got something that is a big deal? Now, it's not just, look at me. It's extrapolate the circumstance that each individual is dealing with over 320 million people. And then start to think, okay, well, how many, serious diseases are being missed in this period? And it's not going to end anytime soon, right? The shutdowns in these hospitals, they're just beginning to get up to speed. And it's been now, it'll be easily 6 weeks, going on 2 months of just missed medical action other than dealing with COVID-19, everything else. But people still have heart attacks. There's a lot of really bad diseases and things out there that people, as we know, heart disease and cancer and lung cancer and all these things, those still very much exist and are killing people. And we've effectively said, the preventative measures that we can take in hospitals, those all get put on hold right now. Now, again, they tell us this was the only way, but hospitals are going bankrupt. Okay, so Pelosi's pretense that Republicans wouldn't give money for that is total crap. But then you also just have some of the, well, for Republicans perhaps unintended, but the consequences of the rescue bill itself. Really interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal by Kurt Huffman. It's a commentary piece. Our restaurants can't reopen until August. Employees refuse to return to work as long as they're getting an extra $600 a week. He talks about how he's trying to keep going. The goal is to survive. They're doing some takeout. This reminds me of all the restaurants in New York. And the service industry employs, I think it's 10 to 15% of America. I think it's something like that. Producer Mark fact checked me on that one. I think it's 10 to 15% of America. It's a big, service industry jobs are huge. They're a huge part of the economy, irrespective of whether my off the cuff number is right in line. And, he says this restaurant's at 30% of their usual revenue. And here's what's going on. Quote, we started making the calls last week to our furloughed employees, but they've already begun receiving weekly federal pandemic unemployment compensation checks of $600 under the CARES Act. When we asked our employees to come back, they all said, no thanks. If they return to work, they'll have to take a pay cut. The starting wage for a line cook in one of our restaurants is $15 an hour. These cooks receive at least $1 an hour in tips, so at minimum, they make $16 an hour or $640 before taxes for a 40-hour week. The overwhelming majority of our laid-off cooks qualified for Oregon unemployment compensation, for $416 in our example, based on the cook's wages. The extra $224 a week provides a strong incentive to return to work. But as of this week, the same employee receives $1,016 a week, or $376 more than he made as a full-time employee. Why on earth would he want to come back to work? The Trump administration is talking about setting a timeline for when the country can open for business. For my business, Congress has already locked down that date. We can open our dining rooms on August 1st once the government stops paying people $15 an hour on top of standard unemployment compensation to stay home. Democrats wanted this. This is a stealth $15 minimum wage, my friends.